So welcome to the Node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for January 4th, 2023. Welcome to everybody to the new year. So welcome to the Node.js And before we get started on the regular agenda, is there any announcements that people would like to share?
Can you please promote Anatoly?
I just did.
I'm trying to release Node.js 19.4. We are just having some build issues. I think some machines are with no space, but it should be released today.
Okay. Sounds good.
There's also a Node 18 version that's also having some test and build issues, but it should be out either today, the very latest tomorrow.
Okay. Sorry, just taking the final notes on that. Any other announcements people want to share? Okay, if not, we'll move on to the issues which are tagged for the agenda. The first one that was tagged is test runner, add initial code coverage support. I don't know, remember Colin if you tagged it for the agenda, but
I think I might have tagged it.
Okay.
That's like a spin-off of the experimental one. Do you want to do the other one first, and then we can do those two together?
Sure. Okay, so this is proposal subdivide experimental status, right? I'll move that to the top in the doc. Yep, makes sense. Okay, go for it.
Well, that could take a long time. I was thinking, I think there was a third one on there. Do we want to do that one first, and then we can?
Okay.
Probably fill up
So
the time with
the other one is, I think, the make global this extend event target. We can start with that one. I can see who tagged it. I don't know if whoever tagged that could jump in. That'd be great. Otherwise, I'm just taking a look. I can see Mateo tagged that.
Yeah, there's some disagreement on that. I mean, I can comment on it since I weighed in on it. So the whole kind of the backstory of that, it is a web platform compatibility question. Global this in browsers and other runtimes like Workerd and Dino and stuff like that does extend from event target to be able to handle events like unhandled rejection, which we expose in a non-standard way through process as an event emitter. So the idea here really is, do we want our global this to extend from event target so that it is compatible with other runtimes, that kind of thing. So there's definitely arguments for and against it. The key argument against it is we already have process as an event emitter where most of our process level events are emitted, like on error, unhandled rejection, all of those. This could be a separate path that causes confusion. How do we handle those events? What if the events are handled in both places? What is the priority between those? Do we deprecate the process events? There's a ton of questions that would need to be answered before I think we could decide. And just making it just making global this an event target is also to one of Mateo's points, is a breaking change on its own. And we have seen cases where having that global those global events does cause some risk causing some brittleness in applications. And I have heard from browser developers that if they were able to do it all over again, they would never have made the global an event target because of the brittleness and stuff and the complexity that it entails. So on the one hand, it's compatible with everything else, and people can write code that works in all the environments. On the other hand, we have the additional complexity and issues that causes.
So I had a question that never really got answered on that thread, which was basically like, is this something that could be toggled? Like, I don't know how, runtime flag or something, but is there some way that we, keep the default behavior or the current behavior as the default, but then someone wants this behavior for whatever reason, they can toggle it to be enabled? Or is that just adding like a lot of complexity for not much gain? Or
I think it's adding complexity for not much gain. Personally, just personal opinion. I don't see any real gain there. It's going to make things more confusing. Module developers, is this toggle on or off, right? In any particular, node version or node instance, and where does that toggle live? How do I detect whether it's there or not? It's just what I would ultimately end up doing as a module developer is just say process on is always there. So I'll just rely on that, right? So it's, yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I think it'll it will not be that much complexity for users, but it would be a lot of complexity for package authors. Because how are you supposed to know whether your process is the one that you get events on, or that seems to be a lot of complexity.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm all for web platform compatibility when it makes sense, but I think this particular one makes it very complicated. It's got a lot of thorny issues.
Well, it seems. Sorry, go ahead.
We have discussed this in Windsor CG about whether or not to make that global event target part of kind of that minimum core web platform API. We decided not to do that and to make it like if you're going to have your global emit events, then yes, make it an event target, but not making that a requirement that these web platform compatible runtimes would have to do it. So
I mean, I feel like it falls under the category of like set timeout, where, a long time ago, before web compatibility was really a priority or a thought on the node team, we implemented something like this process global, and now we're kind of stuck with it. Like, we can't change it meaningfully without it being really difficult and breaking a lot of people. So it just has to, we should almost have a section in the docs of like, unfortunate divergences from compatibility for historical reasons that, can't be changed or won't be changed. But
It also doesn't sound like people are saying there's a huge value in doing it.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to find out. So my understanding is that the background here is web workers, that there's a long-standing issue about our compatibility with web workers. Since however great Node's threading model is, it's not fully compatible with web workers, and apparently having global this be an event target would be required for web worker compatibility. So that's, as far as I can tell, that's the main motivation here.
and even then, like I said, from the conversations I've had with folks that have implemented web workers, like, a lot of browser developers, they would not make global this a event target. And like even other runtimes, like in workers, our original model was that web workers model with the global event target, but we're moving away from that. And we don't want users to use that model anymore because of the brittleness and issues that it introduces. So it's like, I don't want to introduce a problematic new pattern into Node that's just going to add complexity. So I mean, I'm sympathetic to the goals, but I just don't think it's going to be worthwhile.
So is my understanding correct that that would have been the main motivation here? And if that falls away because it's kind of an anti-pattern, then we wouldn't want to do it.
That would be mine, yeah. Interested in what others think, though. I don't want to be the only one talking.
I'm sure this is a crazy idea and you could just respond with no, but I don't suppose we could just make process and global this aliases of the same object. Because then there'd be lots of extra properties on global this that don't belong there.
Yeah.
That's what-
There's just way too many stuff on process.
Huh?
Way too many. There's just way too many stuff on process. So
There's that too.
It was a good idea though.
Yeah, if it wasn't overloaded with, you know, 1,000 different things, then yeah, we could consider it, but.
I mean, or somehow make them this aliases of the same thing, but only certain properties are accessible when you call it from process. I don't know. Just trying to think of like, are there other solutions here?
And even with web workers, there's a way of doing it. Like if somebody implemented web workers, there's nothing to say that web worker implementation, when you're running inside it, it's global this could be an event target. Just the one that's default in node is not, right? Or somebody can create a VM, a context for the VM module where its global is a global this. So it's or is an event target. So it's not like people do not have options currently where they could make this work right now. It's just not
Another
default global this.
Another crazy idea. Could we make it so global this add event listener actually just registers on process.on?
Unfortunately, no, because of the way that the event APIs work. When you add event listener, that handler is expected to get back an event object, whereas event listener is or like you're expected to get like a series of arguments that are passed to it. I don't think that those are compatible enough for us to.
Don't the handlers get a this? Then what's the this if you delegate the process as the global this? That would be weird.
That's a good question. I don't know. Let me see what Dino does here.
I think Gino follows the spec who says that if this is undefined, treat it as the global object.
Yeah, I think it.
And the global object is an event target.
Yeah, he uses he uses global. That'd be the change art, for event emitter. This is the event emitter.
Yeah, then I guess it's more of a problem than value.
Unless somebody
Right.
comes up with a absolute killer use case for it, it's going to be too much complexity.
Fair enough.
I think there is still value of making isomorphic code possible with capturing well-specified events on global this, but also we already do not have that kind of life cycle that works well with the browser one. And also we don't have the same kind of events that browsers emits. Like we don't even have the same kind of unhandled rejection that browser emits, even though we have one, but that's like different. So we might as well focus on solving that problem before trying to make global this event target, because that's like a bigger problem in my opinion.
Okay, should we leave a comment on the issue or just leave it as the discussion in the TSC minute?
Well, let's just confirm, is there, I just want to make sure we're not talking over anybody. I mean, is there anybody that feels like this absolutely should happen? And you have,
I think the question is like, is there something that can't be done unless we do this? Like, is there some feature of web workers that people can't? Like, if the only downside is someone has to write defensively and be like, if processed, then do this, else global this dot add event listener. That's unfortunate, but we could just document it. But if there's like something that just can't be achieved without doing this, then we'll need to think a little harder.
Yes,
something
you
that
could.
can't be, go ahead.
Yeah, there's custom events. If you dispatch a custom events on global disk, you can do this in browsers, not in Node.
But you can also just add something to global that's an event listener. Or maybe just use process. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, like for me, I mean, it doesn't go necessarily back to what, I mean, like doing this does enable cases in certain cases. Somebody could, like I said, somebody could already use like the VM module and basically, run code with a global scope that has, with a global this that has, that is an event target. So it is possible to do. It's, the question is whether it should be Node's default global this that should be an event target. And I don't, I just, going back, yes, we absolutely could do it. I just think that it's not a question of, can we toggle back and forth? I just think it adds too much confusion, right? Where do you listen for unhandled rejections? Are we going to deprecate the process on unhandled rejection event, and just use the global disk one? What is the transition path for code if we do that? Or are we just going to continue to do both? If somebody uses both, is there some kind of priority order between them? Or if you register one, will the other one not work? I think there's just way too many questions. Same thing with, would a add event listener error, like a global this error event, work the same as process on error, where if it's not caught, right, it crashes the process? I mean, there's tons of questions like that that would need to be answered. Otherwise, it just ends up being very, very confusing. So, I mean, I see that as being the key problem personally. I know Matteo, just based on what he raised, I think also has just concerns about just brittleness of the pattern. So. But yeah, going back to the question, whether we comment on the issue, I think we need to just make sure that we have consensus here that this is something we do or do not want to do, which, maybe quick call for that. And then
I would say maybe we don't slam the door. Be like, we're leaning against this for now, but if someone comes up with a compelling reason why this needs to happen, we'll consider it, something like that.
Yeah, I think that works.
So do we want to comment? So basically comment on issue, which would be, okay, at this point, I'll just write something and then make sure everybody's happy with that. So we discussed in the TSC meeting today, at this point, this consistency seems to be that the value does not outweigh the issue's problems, unless there's a compelling use case, something.
Yeah.
A compelling use case we are not aware of. Does that sound right?
Yeah. I would, potentially mention like the web workers case, like we know that this would be useful
Yeah.
for web workers, but right now we feel that there are other ways that that could be done that doesn't
Okay.
involve making nodes global this events, right?
And maybe that we would consider it for just within the web workers context.
Yeah.
Okay, freeze scroll.
I mean, for web workers, we wouldn't consider it. We would probably require it, right? Yeah. So it's not spec compatible.
So if I put this.
Yeah, that works for me.
Anybody, any suggested tweaks or anything like that? Otherwise, I could add that to the issue. Okay, I will paste that there and go from there. Okay, I am going to go then to back to the agenda, and we can say the next one we were going to talk about was the proposal subdivide experimental status, which I think Jeffrey, you'd opened, right?
Yeah. So you can share it if people want to read it. So yeah, so this was basically so this grew out of, like, I've been working on the loaders API, which we're very close to stable. We're only one PR away from well, like, away from, you know, baking time before being stable, but at least it's the last like item on our to-do list to being stable. And that PR has had a lot of active development in the last couple of weeks, so I'm optimistic it should land fairly soon. But the next, like, you know, major step for loaders would be to apply them to CommonJS as instead of just ESM. The big thing potentially blocking that, and we had a really good discussion in this other thread here for this one that I linked to at the top. There might be a technical way out of this, but my initial impression was that there would be no way to apply the loaders API to CommonJS without possibly breaking some expectations of users of async hooks, specifically of the create hooks API that hangs off of async hooks. I may have been wrong about that, which is great news, in which case then there's not an issue to be resolved. But anyway, where it relates to this is that it got into a long discussion about how this API landed as experimental many years ago with no warnings and with no flags, and has become popular to the point of it being impossible, not only impossible to remove, but also impossible to break, even though it's just still experimental. And so it's not, and I think this isn't specific to that API. It's more like in general, that's a real problem for future development. And so the question was like, how do we prevent this kind of thing from happening again? Was the initial, like, the germ of where this came from. The other part of this was we don't have, like, we're not providing users with much, if any, visibility into how stable or not we consider experimental features. So, you know, especially since some of them never go, like, like every feature I've done has always started with a flag and a warning, and then we drop the flag, and then we drop the warning, and then it becomes stable. But I've since learned that that's not the case everywhere for all teams and all subsystems. So even that isn't exactly there's no way for a user to know, oh, is this experimental feature some like thing that's under active development and is actually going to change at any moment, or is this like in the quote unquote baking phase, it's nearly ready to be released and they're not anticipating any further breaking changes. We're just not providing that information to users, and they can't infer it either, because we're also not uniform in the way we handle the potential ways to indicate that, such as flags and warnings. So that all of that came up in the discussion about async hooks. And so that, drawing off of that, I tried to sketch out what would it be to try to convey that information to users, and also to like add slightly more process around experimental features, enough to prevent a repeat of async hooks where something becomes too popular too fast while experimental, which then can like impede other development or interfere with other things. And the last thing I'll say before I hand off is just, this is very much a draft. It's already been revised several times since I posted this. So like the replies that you see below are often referring to earlier versions. That's not what you see at the top here. And yeah, Matteo pointed out that that discussions are not the best way to handle this. Yeah, I'm sure that's true, but I don't know a better way. So we can deal with that separately. But yeah, what I'm hoping for here is collaboration, not like votes up or down. Like, you know, I've laid out the problems I'm trying to solve. They're written right there. You know, if you disagree that this is the best way to solve them, that's fine. But like, please give me suggestions for better ways to solve them, because in my opinion, this is better than the status quo. Is it better than yet another thing? Maybe not. But you know, let's work together to come up with solutions, rather than being like, oh, I don't like it, -1, and you know, and move on as if there's no problems to be solved here. So, thank you, Michael.
I have 2 points. First of all, I think this sounds better than what we have, but just a little question here. If async hooks would have been released first as experimental alpha, do you think there would have been any difference?
Well, it never would have become popular. I mean, at least as the proposal is written now. And again, this is all subject to change. As of written now, alpha means a build flag, and so it would have had little to no adoption.
Is it a build flag? Okay. Yes. Thank you.
Basically, we don't have anything right now that is alpha that I would, you know, like basically right now, everything lands as beta, graduates to release candidate, and then is stable. That's like our current process. Alpha is for like, there are cases where things couldn't land because they're too unfinished. And so people have done the work elsewhere. Like for the experimental modules implementation that landed in node 12, we had to have a fork of node to develop in, because it wasn't possible to do that work in node safely. You know, Undici and Fetch are examples of things that developed as separate packages, separate libraries that got merged in. We don't have a good process. I mean, I guess anyone could just land something with a build flag now, but it's an unused pattern that perhaps we should be encouraging more of like, it's probably better to land it in node under a build flag than some other repo. You know, it's a way of solving another problem that has come up of like, how do we get something landed but we're not trying to get users to use it at all? It's like not ready for users to start experimenting with.
But this sounds like something we already have, and it's just something that we need to document for.
It's just adding, yeah. It's really just like
formalizing.
Like every feature I've done has followed this pattern. I mean, they've all started at beta, but like every feature I've done has followed this. It would really, for me, the only difference would be documentation would be noting the level instead of we are currently adding in the docs, like in this version of node, the flag was dropped, blah, blah, blah. So it would just be noting in this version node, it went from, you know, beta to RC, etc.
Yeah, I wanted to add, like, I'm not sure what it solved the async hooks, because that was a long and complicated process. But I think, like, as Jeffrey's saying, we're following this thing, but it's kind of like an unwritten rule. It's always like, well, is it ready to load for us to drop the flag, or is it? So I think actually that, you know, a good part of the value for me is documenting that, yeah, well, when you reach this state, that's when we drop the flag, right? And, you know, and rather than sort of doing it ad hoc, let's document it. So I think that's what I think is good. Raphael, you have your hand up.
Oh yeah. Basically, I just have a question. Do you think that the alpha, beta, and release candidate is like the regular workflow, or let's say I build something that is currently alpha, but after these pull requests, I'm pretty sure that it can be like a release candidate. I can basically skip the beta time. Is that
I mean, this is my opinion, but I would think that it shouldn't go through alpha at all if you're like that. It should just start as beta, and then, like, right now, everything we land starts as beta essentially, and then goes through release candidate. I mean, it might start as beta with no flag, or maybe just a warning, or because we don't have a standardization of the process right now. But, you know, there's very little that lands behind a build flag now, and I assume that wouldn't change. This is more just formalizing that, like, if we really want to start using this other category over here, we have a name for it.
So far, I don't see much, I don't know, improvement in your workflow being having alpha, beta, and release candidate. I think that it might be good for non-LTS versions, so we can land things very, very fast. So let's say that I just release the permission model, and then it can be alpha in the 19 and eventually beta. And when it becomes a release candidate, I can move it to 18 LTS. I think that might make sense, but so far I'm not seeing what it will solve directly in our workflow.
But I think it's not necessarily
solve all the
changing the
things
workflow.
I think it solves what I described. That informs users of the status
Yeah.
of experimental features, and then that hopefully influences their behavior. It should make it easier for us to modify them, break them changes, remove them. It should also make users more comfortable using them, because if they see something that's release candidate, they might decide, oh yeah, maybe I can use that one. Whereas otherwise they might just be ignoring all experimental features. So we could get more user feedback, because potentially users might be using experimental features more if there's more transparency about how ready we think they are.
I see Joey has her hand up.
Yeah, I post them in the discussion pretty late, but I guess I'll just bring it up again. I like the idea of having more specific stages of experimentation, but I'm not a fan of using flags and warnings to communicate them, because there used to be this harmony flag that everyone uses. And at some point, it was in the no option environment variable of many server script, and that caused a lot of problems. So in that regard, I don't think if you have a very popular experimental feature, a flag is actually going to stop people from using it. And on the other hand, it might create problem of its own. And also, in terms of warning, if you actually have a very popular experimental feature, people may just use no warning, the no warning flag or no warning environment variable to like ignore it. So yeah.
I mean, that's all true, but that's like, how is it better than to not require these things? Like, if we require them and they disable them, that's fine. But like, they've acknowledged that they're accepting this risk. They're using something that could break at any time or change at any time. Like, I think that's a really good argument for not having a blanket flag, like enable all beta of experimental features, right? Because like very likely someone will turn that on and have no awareness of what experimental features they're using versus not. But you know, right now, all of our experimental features that require flags, it's like one flag per feature. So you're like very explicitly opting into, I know I'm using, you know, back in the day, experimental modules. And I know I'm signing up for like being aware that I could have to, you know, deal with breaking changes at every time I upgrade node. I mean, I think that's a value.
I think that should be communicated in the docs, because you, like, for example, if a feature is already flagged in itself, then whether whether the flag is part of the experimental process doesn't really make much difference. Like, I think the flags and the warnings should be tools that we use to achieve the communication that we want to achieve, but that they should not be part of the process. They should be evaluated on a case by case basis. Like, if we think that a flag is actually going to help us, you know, stop people from relying on it too much, then yeah, we can add it, but I don't think it should be part of the process. That's just my opinion.
I mean, I think everything could be case by case, right? Like, you know, the specific issue after this is about test reporting. I mean, what risk do we have of like, oh, test reporting becomes terribly popular? Probably not much. So maybe we decide it doesn't need the flag or warning, etc. But it's like, I think there's value in having a default. Like, this should be the standard, and then not having a flag would be the exception, rather than like the other way around. You know what I mean? Like, you should have to justify playing a little looser than the standard that we protect ourselves. Because like, also, I doubt anyone thought async hooks when it landed long time ago was at any risk. That, you know, it's like, oh, well, you have to opt into it by explicitly importing the API. You know, anyone who's importing the API knows that, you know what I mean? Like, we probably had no idea that it would potentially cause the problems that it has later on. So I'm also hesitant to be like, oh yeah, we know that this feature is going to be fine and never going to cause issues in the future, because, you know, we've been wrong in the past.
But like, since async hooks became popular without while being in experiment,
It's still
like,
experimental.
Yeah, do you think like, if I don't think it should be alpha from the start, because it was not, I don't like, in my understanding, it was not meant to be like in development. It was released because it was meant to be used by users. Then it probably should have started with beta, but I don't think like, if people
Again,
have to use it,
most things will start as beta on here. That's what it says in the thing.
yeah.
And
like, if there's a killer use case that it solves that requires a flag, I don't think mandating a flag is going to help anything. Like, to stop its adoption. If there's a killer use case that it tends to solve, then yeah, I mean, I think the flags should be part of the tools that we use to achieve that goal. Making a standard doesn't really make a difference in like driving the adoption or stopping the adoption.
yeah, I don't want to talk
Right.
over Ranagi.
Yeah, I see.
I have a suggestion, which is probably bad, but anyway, another way of seeing it is, you know, we only have experimental alpha. So experimental means it's alpha. And then we provide like a canary build of Node.js that includes all of these experimental things for people that want to try them out.
So I think that's what James was, well, I think James is on the call, so we can speak to this, but I think that's what he was probably getting at with the whole idea of like changing our release process. I think that someone else could speak to me, but I read through the links to the discussions about that, but and the bottom line that I took out of that was just that like it would basically be too much work to switch to like a canary line. You know,
Or
we
loop.
sort of already have that from October to April. Like right now we have node 19, you know, and it's, you know, you could argue like, well, why not just have that year round, right? You know, instead of October to April, maybe it should be October to October. And that way there's always that next release is, rather than it being like even odd, where the odd ones are the, you know, not as stable. I mean, I guess they're stable, but they're whatever, they're not destined for LTS. So they're more the experimental branch or beta version of Node. We could have it be like that, where it's always.
The problem there is, and I'm guilty of this as well, you know, version 19 is 19. I can use that. That's you know, it's a version, so why can't I use that? The problem here is that we want to make it. It shouldn't feel okay to use an experimental version for a production environment.
Well, I mean, I think it should be debatable what, like, it might be okay to use a release candidate experimental feature in production. Maybe some people might feel otherwise. I guess it depends on how important the production service is, maybe. But yeah, it shouldn't be okay. It shouldn't feel okay to use what I'm calling beta or alpha here in production. I think that's something we're trying to distinguish and try to mold user behavior into that direction. In terms of the canary line, like the other problem is that like whether it's a separate canary brand release line, or we extend the 19 to year round or whatever, that means that everything graduates just automatically after the year. So something that's only lands in 19 but never backported to 18, well, it's just part of 20, even if it's not necessarily ready. And I don't think we should just have the things being like automatically graduated just because the calendar advances, you know?
Yeah, tricky.
So, and again, I look, this is very much subject to revision. It sounds like we might have consensus that this is worth at least documenting, that like we should add maybe, I don't know if we want these 3 particular levels. We could discuss if there should be 4 or 2 or what. But maybe we could at least decide that like, okay, this should be something that's in the docs of that experimental has subdivisions, or whatever we want to name it. And then whether those subdivisions have requirements attached to them, like that alpha has a build flag, that beta has a runtime flag, etc., could be a follow-up discussion. We could approach this that way if that's something we think we have consensus on. Joey makes really good points, and I don't have like counters to them necessarily. I think that like saying that flags don't achieve the goal of like molding the user behavior into the way we want. I think that's true for some users, but it's also not true for other users. And so it's like not doing it guarantees we don't achieve that goal. Doing it doesn't guarantee that we achieve the goal, but it should achieve it for some people. So that's why I feel like it's better to do it than to not. If there's some other solution that's more likely to be more successful, then by all means, let's do that. But
yeah, I'd want to add that like what I've seen is like having a flag is a serious thing that people push back on. It's sort of like you see the discussion of like, well, we have to remove the flag because while the flag's there, we don't get enough people using it. So I think the flag does make a difference in terms of how many people use a feature or not. Once there's no flag, I think that's in my mind, like does documenting something as experimental without a flag actually give us anything? Like, yes, technically we could be more breaking, but do we ever leverage that? Because by at that point, you know, if somebody can use it and not just themselves, but they use modules that are using experimental features and they have no idea and no way to know, right? So that just happens.
That's the big difference with the runtime flag, is that once the flag is dropped, then npm packages can start using the experimental feature, you know, and feel free to. Whereas when the flag is required, they're very hesitant, like module authors are very hesitant to do so because then they have to put in their README that, you know, you need to run node with this flag in order to use my library, and that discourages people from using the library. So there's a real like user effect on based around runtime flags.
So yeah, I just thought, like, in my opinion, that there's definitely, we achieve something by having the flag. Now we can discuss how and when it gets applied, and like, can you tie that to like a different phase? But it's almost in my mind, like once we take that away, it's like we're well on our way to it just gets used and we can't break it anymore. Ronag, you're have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, just making Jeffrey's point a little bit. I mean, there's two things here. Well, and I feel this falls a little bit under, you know, just formalizing how things are already working today. Because this is kind of what we do today, implicitly. And then there's a separate discussion on, you know, how would we like to improve this? But I think it's good to, you know, write down and formalize how we are doing things currently, and then moving onwards from that.
Yeah, even if that was just in our contributor doc somewhere that says typically the flow is X, that's a starting point, right?
Exactly.
I guess this, I don't know, there was one other issue. I don't know if it makes sense to continue.
Oh, the other
or
issue was
later.
so for the test reporter one, it's adding a new flag, test reporter, and it's, you know, very much an experimental feature. It's like only a first pass. I wouldn't call it alpha, but it's like definitely beta. Like it's not nowhere near close to like being a finished feature. It's going to have a lot of, I mean, maybe technically there won't be any breaking changes, I don't know, but like it's going to have a lot more capabilities added to it. So it's certainly not like ready for like release, what I would call release candidate. So I was thinking like, well, this feels like almost like the ideal case for this. Like you're already adding a new flag, rather than adding it directly as -- test reporter, add it as -- experimental test reporter. We achieve the benefits of informing users that, you know, they're opting into some experimental feature. We achieve all that, and then we have a dividing line. Like when the flag changes, it's informing users that we consider this to be hopefully ready for stability, and then it goes through a brief baking period and then becomes stable. So I think like I think it's too late probably for -- test to go through that process. It's probably, I would consider it already in RC status. But the other test flags, test reporter and test coverage are they only just landed in, well, one of them hasn't landed yet. The other one landed like a week or two ago. They're probably still closer to that. So that was why I was like, I think it was Colin was adding it. And so I was suggesting that maybe we see how this discussion went with the TSC to see how they felt about flags in general or experimental statuses, to see if it's something that we want to, you know, if we want to start trying to conform to this, then it would mean that that feature lands with the flag being named differently. I mean, I guess it can't hurt to just land it with the experimental test reporter flag name, even if we want to keep discussing this for however much longer. But yeah, that's why this was added to the agenda. Is Colin on?
Sounds like it could go to the pure discussion, right?
So there are a couple issues with just renaming the flag to experimental. The biggest one is we don't actually clean up these experimental flags. There have been discussions in the past about how just removing an experimental flag could be a breaking change. If you search through the CLI argument parsing, you'll see lots of no op flags. I'm pretty sure like workers is still, the experimental workers flag is still there. So it's not just a matter of renaming the flag. Like we're carrying around all this baggage for years.
Yeah, but you know, I think that's a very, very small price to pay. I mean, all of the experimental modules is still there and it's a no op. Like, I think that's, I really don't think that's like a good argument for not like, you know, informing users that it should be that they're using experimental feature. So we're almost out of time. I guess what I'd like to know is what do we consider next steps? I could open a PR to the docs to maybe up whatever the page is that we define I think it's 4 status levels of like deprecated, experimental, stable, legacy. I could open a PR to update that page to define these new levels essentially within experimental. I could maybe do that just by itself without talking about flags or warnings. And then, you know, once that lands, the like further defining these levels could come as a follow-up. And then after that, we would have to go through all the experimental features that we have. And I mean, nothing's going to be alpha pretty much. So we would just be deciding whether everything we have that's still experimental is a beta or RC.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Can we check about the change fetch from experimental to stable before we close out? Because we have Robert on the call and it's right on his LA.
I thought that was waiting on Matteo. I mean, I'm fine with that.
Waiting on Robert.
But...
Yeah, I know if Robert wants to weigh in on that one, that would be good to.
Sorry, you lost me there. Which one was it?
This is the doc change fetch from experimental to stable.
Yeah, so this is blocked because web streams are still experimental, and you're probably the most aware of if web streams should be ready to graduate to stable.
Yeah, I mean, web streams are a little tricky because we don't have many people actively working on them. I think Raphael is the only one that's actively working on them. So I actually don't know so much about web streams, only normal node streams. I don't think they are 100% spec compliant, but I can't say for sure.
Yeah, as far as I know, they are. The only problem is basically performance issues, but this is not a blocking for making it making fetch out of experimental, or at least stable. There's just one thing I remember from this issue is that we can't move. Oh yeah, that's it. We need to first move web strings to stable and then move the fetch to stable, right? That's the order.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm finalizing some discoveries. I think for the next meeting at least I will have something to share, but I'm pretty sure web strings is good to go. Not performatic, but it's good to go.
Yeah, if web streams are stable, I'm okay with making Undici stable or fetch stable.
So basically, we're waiting on PR from you, Raphael, to land. Then we can mark them as stable. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm just looking to some other performance issues from fetch to web strings and see if that's compliant or that's acceptable at least. But I would hear also James, who wrote everything. So I'm just checking, you know. But for me, okay. I think that's good to go.
Okay, so in that case, do we basically have next steps lined up and we could take this one off of the agenda?
That's my opinion.
Okay, so I will remove the TSC agenda from the issue and maybe I'll make a comment. So discuss in TSC meeting today, remove agenda tag. See minutes for, okay. Okay, that's great. We are at time, so any other issues that we must cover before we close out for today?
So I guess since Robert is there, there's his PR expose stream symbols. Maybe we can just talk. Roberto, you so you left a comment here saying you didn't know how to proceed. So do you have still time to invest on this, or would you rather leave it to someone else?
If someone else wants to fill it in, be my guest.
Okay, I'll see what I can do.
I wasn't here when you guys discussed it. I would almost hope that they don't get documented, a little bit like we have underscore writable state and underscore readable state in streams that are a little bit secret that we don't actually want people to use. These kind of fall into that category, but yeah,
if I remember correctly, Colin pointed out that it was used on Dino and other runtimes, so it would kind of need to be stable enough.
Well, I would say that Dino and the other runtimes should use readable stream.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
So I know Dino is using readable stream, but if we're introducing all these hidden symbols, isn't this going to have implications for readable stream?
How?
I don't know. Someone explain it to me, because my understanding of the issue was that this was going to be some type of public API that was going to be undocumented.
I mean, this is just to solve the specific case where we have a userland package that needs to access hidden state in a node core module and vice versa.
So it has no implications on readable stream at all?
No, this is just so that readable streams and node core streams can interrupt. That's the only point here.
Okay. Unless some library starts using them, right?
What?
If some userland libraries start using them, it could start being a problem.
Yeah, it falls still on the category like underscore writable state and underscore readable state. If you do that, then here be dragons. I don't know of a different way of doing it. Like user libraries should not use those. And if you do use them, you better know what you're doing.
So maybe it should be underscore properties then.
Yeah, that could. The problem is that those symbols are used for interop with stream-like objects, and we don't want to add, symbols to known symbols to somebody else's instance, because they might conflict. We don't actually know what is on what other properties there are on the instance we are setting these values on.
Could you maybe add a underscore trailing getter that fetches the symbol? So we still keep the underscore leading properties. That means don't use this and the symbol.
How is that different from a symbol?
It's I think it's common knowledge that underscore leading properties, or don't use them. But if we have a node symbol for,
do you mean to add underscore in the symbol name?
Yeah, maybe in the symbol name, something that shows it's internal.
Yeah, I'm good with that. Could you add that suggestion in the PR?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, just add a comment and for reference.
All right.
Okay, anything else we should discuss before we close out for today?
I just put into the chat what I was planning to write on the issue for the experimental stuff. Tell me if you think that's a fair summary of what we agreed to, and if you have if anyone has any notes on it.
I guess you could put it under the minutes, and we can review them later.
Oh, we could do it there too. Yeah, I was just going to put this as a comment on that discussion thread, but we should put it in the minutes too. But regardless of where we put it, is this what everyone thinks we settled on, or am I missing anything?
I think the first step is, I didn't hear anybody arguing with that. We'll see, like not everybody was here, so we'll see. But you've got the PR review process to handle that, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, the PR's got to get approved to land. So, I mean,
exactly.
This is, and of course, who knows what's going to change? Maybe we add more levels or whatever.
Yeah,
there's many points in which this will continue to get revised in this succession of PRs. So I don't think we need to like settle all the questions up front. So, but we are, at least it seems like, agreed that, okay, we're more likely than not to do something along these lines, even if it's only a documentation change. So I can do the first PR to at least start the docs change and, go from there. Is that correct?
I think I'd say there's enough people who think that, but there's also some who have expressed clear negative ones on doing anything. So, but it seems like my feeling is your suggestion, that's your suggestion for the next step of a PR which removes the part like tying it to flags or anything. That'll let us have a smaller discussion and see if we end up with, yeah, let's do the separation or nothing, right? Like that's the best way to try and make progress on that.
Yeah, I would also say, like, I don't want this to be a like any single person can veto it type of thing. I'd rather not call for a vote, but like I feel like this has to be a thing where, like, we should just go with whatever most people think is the best way to manage this.
Yeah,
I feel like, but so okay, well, yeah, let me know if there's any tweaks or whatever. But
okay, so I added the notes to the minutes, so they'll be there as well as like you adding them to the issue makes sense.
Thanks.
Okay, well, with that, thanks for everybody who's taken the time and those who watched the recording. We will see everybody next week. Thanks. Bye.